على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد. وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وقوله الحق: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ثم جعلناك على شريعة من الأمر فاتبعها ولا تتبع أهواء الذين لا يعلمون إنهم لن يغنوا عنك من الله شيئا وإن الظالمين بعضهم أولياء بعض والله ولي المتقين. هذا بصائر للناس وهدى ورحمة لقوم يوقنون. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected teachers, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In our first discussion, we looked at the question of, is the Catholic Church a source of goodness on the face of this earth? And then turned the question around back on our own selves and asked, is the Muslim community a source of goodness for us here in the United Kingdom? And then took the question a little bit further. Not only is it supposed to be a source of goodness, is it a source of genuine change and progress in society or not? And because of this, we want to be able to ask ourselves about where Britain is going in the next decade and how you and I can ensure that our Islam actually brings about positivity in the society in which we live in. Now, if you recall, we mentioned in the debate that took place a particular line. If you remember, we were talking about the abuse that was unfortunately happening to children under the eye of the Catholic Church. And Anne Widdecombe in that debate, she said, well, we could not foresee any change. We were in the midst of a society that practiced these things. Therefore, you could not reasonably expect the Catholic Church to practice anything different. The response came from Stephen Fry, well then what was the point of the Catholic Church in the first place if it's not going to be any different from the rest of society? Which again means that when you turn that question upon the Muslims, if we are acting and thinking the same as everybody else in society is, then what is the point of your Islam in the first place? Surely your Islam should be leading you to something above and beyond what the rest of society is. Otherwise, you may as well be a Christian. Otherwise, you may as well be an atheist, because surely your religion isn't producing anything for you, or at least the way in which you and I are practicing the religion isn't productive for us in any way, shape or form. So this was the crux of our first night's discussion. The discussion last night, we turned to the example of the Holy Prophet of Islam, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. And we asked the question, how did the Prophet ponder upon his society and make a change in it? And if you recall, we mentioned that Ayatollah Sheikh Jaffer Subhani, may Allah grant him a long life, writes in the biography of the Prophet, The Message, that when the Prophet was in Ghar Hira, when he was looking down at the city of Mecca, not only was he worshipping God, but he was pondering deeply upon the realities of his society, and that when he would come, what type of changes he needed to bring, how would he go about institutionalizing those changes, who would be against him and why, who would be with him and why. And this gave him a deep understanding of the way in which he needed to challenge the society in order to bring it out of its darkness into its light, to break the shackles and lift the burdens that were present upon that society. And so we started over these last nights to draw up a list of the challenges that exist within our own society. If you recall yesterday, we mentioned that the society that we live in, our own politicians can literally say in a Tory party leadership campaign, in the debate, on TV, live in front of millions of people, that we will not prorogue this democracy, we will not stop this democracy from taking place, we will allow Parliament to debate the issue of Brexit, and literally a few weeks later, the very same politicians will do the exact opposite, and then champion the exact opposite. We have to understand the challenges that we live in, the society that we live in, and what that means to the Muslim community and to wider Britain as well. Yesterday we mentioned about Aaron Banks. Aaron Banks is a businessman worth £250 million. And despite all the power that he wields, such as to the extent that he actually was the financier of the Leave.eu campaign, he has taken the country of the UK to a whole new pedestal in its history and shaken the whole political spectrum. Despite all of this man's power, a 16-year-old girl and her truth is such a target for these individuals that he had to tweet out a death threat to her, a veiled death threat to her when she was traveling from one country to another. Can you see? That you can have all these veils of darkness, but even a 16-year-old girl has the power to shake and put fear into these people because of how insecure they are. Indeed, as we stated yesterday, the Quran mentions that they weave for themselves these houses and these structures which are no different to a spider weaving its web. They think that it's the strongest of structures. لَوْ كَانُوا يَعْلَمُونَ. If only they knew that this is the weakest of houses that they build. Now think about this. If a 16-year-old girl can put such fear into this business community, into the political community, with just a drop of her truth, imagine what Islam in the haqiqi sense can do for this world. Do you understand where we're going? When you put just a little bit of haqq, it decimates falsehood. Because by its nature, falsehood is retreating. It cannot be any other way. So this tells us that there are vast opportunities that when we actually think through our Islam, when we remove the shackles from it and make it not just an Islam which is culturally inherited, not just an Islam that is within the four walls of the Masjid or the Husayniyah, when we have an Islam that can actually breathe, can present itself, can you imagine the changes that it can make within society? This is why the Prophet was so successful. And this is why when the awaited Savior of humanity comes, he will also be so successful. Ajjalallahu ta'ala faraj al-sharif. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now, tonight we start our discussion by marking yesterday's homework. I'm sure you all know by now, each night we give homework. And who can remember what last night's... I love it. We already have hands up. So the first question, who can remember what the homework was? Hands up so I can see. That's brilliant. You know, we're actually improving here. It's gone from around 10 to 20% of the audience. So well done to all of you. Now, who did the homework? That's a good ratio from those who remembered to those who did. So for those of you who don't recall the homework was the following. What in your reflection are the 5 biggest challenges that face Britain in the next decade, and then put a hierarchy to it, order it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So again, remind me, who did the homework? Yeah? I'm going to ask some of the younger ones, is that all right? If you got grey in your beard like I have, you don't get to answer tonight. If that was the ruling for me, then I wouldn't even be able to do the majlis, right? Because of how much grey there's coming. So the young brother sitting at the back. Assalamu alaikum. What's your name, brother? Nice to meet you. Pleasure. Could you kindly tell me what are your 5 top challenges for Britain? Be loud so everyone can hear. And they're going to repeat it because then the sisters also need to hear. Brexit. Global warming. Poverty. Did you write them down? Can you remember the others? Okay, that's really good. Okay, so my young friend, how old are you? 11, mashallah. Give him a salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa alihi. I love these answers. Look at that. Brexit, global warming, and poverty. Now, can I ask, is that in the order? Yeah? Now, that's brilliant. Now here, not only have we got an example of some of the challenges that face Britain, we've got a hierarchy. Now, why did you put Brexit ahead of global warming? And how long has global warming been happening? Your entire life, right. So, on what basis is Brexit higher than global warming as a challenge? Fair. More people worry about it. Is that the way to be able to judge whether it's a bigger challenge by how much worry is in it or how much damage it can cause to human life? So which one does more potential damage, global warming or Brexit? Global warming. So here, clearly what we're doing, and the young brother is helping us work through this, there is a way in Islam to be able to structure the order, the hierarchy of the challenges that exist in front of you. Now, the way the Maraji al-Kiram do that is something which is known as the Maqasid al-Sharia. Maqsad, we can loosely translate to being like an aspiration or a goal, like a ghaya. So the Maqasid is the jam', the plural, Maqasid al-Sharia, the goals of the Sharia, the hierarchy, the aspirations of the Sharia. So what we have is sometimes the ayat and the ahadith piece together a certain hierarchy of issues, and they also help us deal with the contradictions within those hierarchies as well. Because we need to know when the Sharia seeks to either protect something or it seeks to establish something, then we need to know the order of that thing so that we also get a sense of the hierarchy of that as well. Let me give you some examples so you and I can think through it, and that will help us in some of this tool of trying to make a hierarchy. We don't need to have a set hierarchy tonight, but it's an exercise for you to think about for yourself. Where do you put your time and effort? Where do you put your money into? That's where we're going to go with the rest of the series. Now, as an example, my young brother, he said that global warming might affect more lives than Brexit. Now, what we are saying here is that human beings have a right to life. And so the fact that people might die because of global warming, this would take priority over the issue of Brexit. That's obvious, isn't it? But that's important to realize and to just become conscious. So, for example, the right to life or the protection of life is the supreme or amongst the supreme maqasid, right? The right to the protection of your wealth, the right to the protection of your honor and dignity, the right to the protection of your family, the right to the protection of your intellect. All of these, in the traditional understanding of the maqasid, are at the highest level of things that need to be protected. Now, there are also other ahadith that help us to be able to think about some of these things. Let me give an example. Hadith from the Holy Prophet of Islam, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. Our Prophet is narrated to have said in a very early recorded hadith, لا خير في الوطن إلا مع الأمن والسرور. That there is no value, no goodness to living in a place unless there comes with it الأمن والسرور. So aman is what? Security. We would say peace, security. And surur, happiness. But happiness of what nature? Spiritual happiness. For example, we say in the dua in Shahr Ramadan, Allahumma adkhil ala ahli al-quburi as-surur. When we say, oh Allah, put into the graves of our marhumin happiness, we don't mean material happiness, do we? We don't want them to have £1 million because it can't help them. What we mean is a spiritual happiness, a spiritual satisfaction for them. So the Prophet said that if you're going to live somewhere, there's no value to it unless you can have security and spiritual happiness. If those two things aren't there for you, then your time there cannot be productive. So you can see here, now if you imagine, apply this to the real world. By and large, we have security here, don't we? Alhamdulillah. But let's say you lived in a state that is going through a state rebuilding exercise. For example, let's say Iraq in a post-Daesh world, right? Security has to be at the top of the agenda, doesn't it? And we know that when it comes to the relationship between tribes, the borders, when it comes to the issue of trafficking of weapons, all of these things need to be understood under the umbrella of aman, under the umbrella of security. So here we understand that although they may also be going through the issues of, let's say, global warming and other issues as well, by virtue of certain ahadith, we're able to pick out that there should be a hierarchy where the attention is given to certain matters in terms of what are the most urgent issues that come to that particular land. So through this, we're able to not only say that there's an identification of a number of issues. If you and I went together and sat down, we could probably pick out 20 different problems that are existing in Britain. But we also need to create a hierarchy in order to say where our priorities lie as well. Now, why is that important? Because as we develop these conversations, we are also talking in one of our nights, for example, about where to spend our money. We have tens of millions of pounds when it comes to khums, sadaqat, and other. So now when we have that financing, where do our priorities lie? Well, how do we figure out our priorities? The maqasid al-sharia. This is why this is important for us to know as a prelude to our discussion. We can't have a whole series on maqasid tonight. All we can do is tell you these things exist, and that's what shapes the discussion and informs the discussions at hand. Now, I'm going to throw out one or two issues that my young brother may not have mentioned, and it's not to say that these are more important, but I imagine that many of us would already think about the issues such as poverty. We will talk about Brexit tonight and these things. I want to just talk about one or two other problems, and that will have allowed us to have reset our thinking to a number of different issues that we would have talked about through these initial 3 nights. You know, yesterday we were talking about the example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. And if you notice, one of the things we mentioned yesterday was this verse of Surah Sad. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, أَجَعَلَ آلِهَةَ إِلَهًا وَاحِدًا إِنَّ هَذَا شَيْءٌ وَإِنَّ هَذَا لَشَيْءٌ عُجَابٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quotes, this is important, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quotes the Arab response, the pagan response to the Prophet. Now think about that. There's 6,500 verses in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could tell us anything, right? Verses about what's going to happen in the future, verses of spirituality. Yet from time to time, the Quran quotes the munafiqeen, quotes the mushrikeen, and so on and so forth. Why? The Quran is eternal. The Quran guides us in every era, in every location, which means that there's something going on. When Allah Jalla Jalaluhu decides to tell us what the statement of the kuffar were back to the Prophet, it means it has some eternal usage for you and I. So now the Prophet is in Mecca. And this is the city of Ibrahim, salamullahi alayhi. And now he wants to be able to re-establish Tawheed within his society. And he starts telling them only one God exists. All of your idols, the things that you are worshipping, that you've created with your own hands, there's no benefit to it. There's no fa'idah in it. And then they respond. أَجَعَلَ آلِهَةَ إِلَهًا وَاحِدًا إِنَّ هَذَا لَشَيْءٌ عَجَابٌ. Does this man make all of our gods into one God? What a strange thing this is. We've never heard of it. Now there's two options here, isn't there? The first option is that they're lying. Right? That they know about the idea of Tawheed, they know the idea of one God, and when they say, what a strange thing this is, we've never heard of these arguments, they're just outright lying. This is a possibility, isn't it? What's the other possibility? That they're not lying, but they just can't fathom it in the way in which they have understood the world in which they are living in. But what has to happen to an individual or to a society that their city is based off the hand of Ibrahim alayhi salam? The Kaaba that they circumambulate, that they pray to, that they do Hajj to, which they were still doing at that time, that they know their own history so well, yet they can't fathom the idea that that city is based on Tawheed and the idea of the re-establishment of Tawheed. Something has to be happening here in the collective psyche such that they're being tricked into not remembering this issue. Now, either way, that tells us something about the thinking, the psychology of the society of the time, doesn't it? Now, link the 2 points together. I said earlier, yesterday, and I recounted it today for a purpose, that we live in a society that we have politicians that literally on camera can say one thing, and then a month later, literally a month later, will do the exact opposite and justify it. We have an example at the time of the Prophet where they have a society that is based off Ibrahim alayhi salam, yet they're actually saying, we've never heard of one God. What a strange thing this is. Something must be going on here. Now, according to commentators and reflection on the Quran, if we take the first answer that they're just lying, then we can't go any further with this verse. It's just they're lying. But if we take the second option, no, they're not lying. There's a wool that's been pulled over their eyes such that they're unable to even conceive of such basic truths. We have to ask, how did they get into that situation? And the answer might be something like this. We're going to talk about this more in a further night. It might be something like this. That the power structure at that time, that the Quraysh, they felt at risk from the idea of moving from 365 gods to one God. Why? Because their power was built off the back of that idol worship. And so if anyone came and broke those idols, not only would the idols come tumbling down, so too would the power alongside it that they enjoyed. Let me give you a very simple example to understand this. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the names of different idols, right? There's Lat, there's Uzza, there's Manat, and so on and so forth, right? There's 365 of them. Now, imagine we put for a second a a benefit or something to each one of these idols. Let's just say Lat was for the benefit, like if you prayed to Lat, you would get the benefit of victories in war, for example. And if you prayed to Uzza, for example, you might get the benefit of more rizq. And if you pray to Manat, you might get the benefit of sons. As you know, as we stated at that time, they prayed for sons because they didn't value women. Now imagine for a second, I've got my 3 friends who are sitting here. So I'm going to make them different tribes, and I'm going to give each and every one of them one of these great idols, right? My friend Rasul here has Lat, we have Uzza, and we have Manat. Remember, they are not Lat, Uzza, and Manat, yeah? Although some of us really worship these beautiful faces such that it might be. But we mean that they are the tribes, and the tribes, they have each idol for themselves, right? They hold Lat with themselves, they hold Uzza, and they hold Manat. Now, you're also all tribes, or you're all parts of tribes. You can imagine going to war was a constant. We mentioned this yesterday. There was constant war at that time. Sheikh Subhani mentions in his book, The Message, that there used to be wars that would go on for so many generations that the actual tribes fighting with each other would actually forget what they were fighting about. This is how long wars used to go on for. Generations. The Prophet actually migrated from Mecca to Medina off the back of the Aus and Khazraj, saying, we've fought each other for so many centuries, we've actually destroyed and depleted our entire stock. Everything is gone. We need you to come build peace between us. Right? So now because there's constant war, don't you imagine Lat is important for you? Yes? When it comes to the issue of rizq, everybody needs rizq. But of course everybody wants more and more. And especially if you're in constant war and you need a constant supply of this rizq because you're fighting and stealing from each other and raiding from each other, and you're in a desert kind of land, an arid land of which there is very little access to good rizq, what are you going to be praying for? Rizq. So who do you go to? Uzza. Right? And because at that time women had no value, and it was the men who used to plow the fields, it was those who went on trade caravans, they were the ones who would go to war, so you needed more sons, because if you didn't have sons, then your tribe would be easily killed off. What did you pray for? Sons. So where would you go to? Manat. Now, imagine, if you don't have strong idols, if you don't have the big idols of the big issues, where are you going to be going constantly? Lat, Uzza, and Manat. Now, as you know, not only would they just go to the idols, they would also have to give sacrifices to the idols. Sometimes it would be camels and sheep. Sometimes it would be silk and brocade. Sometimes it would be children. Correct? So now all of you, this is very important, understand this clearly, so that if you understand this, you'll understand even the challenges today. If all of you constantly need these 3 idols, what's the flow of the direction of everything? You coming and you giving and handing over silk and brocades and sheep and camels and horses. What's the direction? This direction. Who's getting richer? Who's getting poorer? It's constantly in this direction, correct? If the Prophet comes along and now wants to break these 3 idols, who's going to be cheesed off the most? Is it going to be you? Is it going to be the poor people that the Prophet of Allah is now saying, if you want to go and get sons, pray to Allah. If you want rizq, pray to Allah. If you want to win in wars, pray to Allah. You don't need to be giving silk and brocade and power and all of this stuff to these people. Now you can imagine if you are Abu Sufyan and the heads of the Quraysh, and you are sitting there with these great idols, and the Prophet comes along and tries to break these idols, who is going to feel like they're going to lose all their power? Who? Abu Sufyan and the Quraysh. Now, go back to the verse. أَجَعَلَ آلِهَةَ إِلَهًا وَاحِدًا. Does this man make our gods into one God? If these are the leaders of the Quraysh All they have to do is to whisper it in your ear. And if you're not thinking for yourself, you will buy whatever they say. Can you see that? Does that make sense? So now they feel a threat, don't they? Losing their idols, because they're losing their power. They're losing their wealth, their source of power, source of wealth. So now if the Prophet wants to break the idols, it just takes for Sayyid to come and say, we've never heard of one God. What's he talking about? Inna hadha la shay'un ajab. What a strange thing this is. And eventually, the more you whisper and call the Prophet a magician, a soothsayer, a liar, a madman, قالوا أساطير الأولين, that it's just stories of the ancients. Eventually, all of you will end up saying, Inna hadha la shay'un ajab. What a strange thing this is. That's how it worked. Now, look at the challenges we have in our society. We actually have a society that will believe what politicians say, even though they can be on record one month saying this and another month saying that. So we have to figure through some of these challenges. Yes, there is the challenge of global warming. Yes, there is the challenge of Brexit. Yes, there is the challenge of poverty. But we also need to think through the structural problems that exist within our society. Now, there's a term for this. When you have a media that constantly lies, and when you have a political structure that constantly lies, there's a term for this in sociology. The term is, you live in what is known as a post-truth society. We have to define what this means quickly. Do you know what a post-truth society means? It means the social currency of truth. It's no longer a reasonable expectation in society. Meaning that you and I, when we sit with each other, if I sat on this pulpit and na'udhu billah, I just told you lies, right? And you don't believe anything I'm saying, can we have a reasonable relationship with us? No. If you and I are sitting together and we're having a chai and we can't trust each other in what we're saying, whatever you say, I'm skeptical of. Whatever I say, you're skeptical of. We can't have a working relationship, can we? Because we don't believe each other. When society gets to a point when you can no longer reasonably expect truth from one another, society breaks down because the most important social currency of truth is no longer there. So when I asked you that exercise yesterday of what are the challenges in society, yes, we want to list some of these things, but we also need to go deeper into some of these challenges and then start thinking about the hierarchical order. Because if we have a society that is breaking down in order, it's never worked out well in the past. What happened in the past when Jews and Christians couldn't trust each other in Europe? Who was in the sword? Right? So you have to understand that where we are, we have to be able to understand these things with a little bit of depth and a little bit of insight. هَذَا بَصَائِلٌ لِلنَّاسِ وَهُدًى وَرَحْمَةٌ, the Quran says. This is an insight for mankind, guidance and a mercy for them. Now, having looked at this, tonight what we have done is two things so far. We have asked the question of the challenges, and we have asked the question of hierarchy. And then we've just spoken about how some of the challenges need to be reviewed and go in a little bit deeper. Now, to move the conversation in the series forward, I now need to specify about the Muslim community specifically, about what the Muslim community is going to be facing in the coming decade. And then by the end of tonight, we will have finished the entirety of our introduction, which would have been 3 lectures on the introduction to this series. And then from tomorrow night, we start going into the specifics about resolving some of these, and we start going through the hierarchy that I will present to you. Now, as you heard from Sayyid's introduction, the title of our discussion tonight is, what are the opportunities and the challenges for the Muslim community in a no-deal post-Brexit world? It's a bit lengthy, isn't it? Maybe it's a little bit choppy. What are the opportunities, right? The ways in which we can take advantage. And what are the challenges, that's obvious, going to be for the Muslim community in a no-deal post-Brexit world? So the assumption in the question is that we're going to crash out without a deal, which is looking ever more likely as day by day goes. And today our humble and brilliant PM made a wonderful speech and obviously denied the idea of there being an election beforehand. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to present certain challenges, certain opportunities. And the reason why I give this again is because we're talking about what we need to be doing going forward to make a structural, positive, productive change that is based off an Islamic ideal for society to be able to grow towards its own completion. So we can't talk about solutions until we've highlighted some of these challenges that are going to come up. Now, I'm going to preface this with a very important story. And I want everyone to pay attention to this story and for you and I to think about what I'm trying to say off the back of this story. His Eminence, Shaheed Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayhi, narrates, and this is mentioned in one of the books of his biographies. And this is translated into English. There is a book available called The Ways of the Righteous, 72 Stories of Our Maraji'. And this is where this story is mentioned in this book, in English, translated. Shaheed Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayhi, says the following. He says that one of the greatest challenges in our society at that time was the problem of communism. I'm sure many of those who are of Iraqi descent will know that be it in academia or be it even in Hausa, be it in the thinking of the Iraqi, even Irani community at that time, there was a real problem with communism coming into the fabric of society. So he says, because this was penetrating all of the thinking, Ayatollah Sayyid Muhsin al-Hakim, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayhi, everybody I'm sure here knows, grand marja of the time, asked his son, Sayyid Mahdi al-Hakim, to approach me, Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, to write a book responding to the issues of communism. So as you know, Shaheed al-Sadr had written, for example, a number of books, particularly our philosophy, our economics. So because of the work that I was doing, the marja asked me to write a book which could then respond adequately to the philosophy and the belief system of communism, could counteract it in the Hausa, in academia, in the country. Now I'll tell you the rest of the story before I make the point. He says the following, and this is just phenomenal. I mean, the sincerity of Shaheed al-Sadr. May Allah help us to have this sincerity when we serve the Husseini message. You know what he says? He says, I had no idea that this book would gain so much fame for the author. SubhanAllah. He doesn't even say me. He talks in the third person. He said, I had no idea that this book would cause so much fame for the author. Beforehand, he says, before I published, I had asked myself, would it be better if I just published this under a pseudonym or just under the name of a group of scholars or in my name? And it's something I wrangled with. He said, now that the book has reached so much fame and so much fame for the author, I reflect on myself now, knowing what I know. If I could go back in time, would I truly have the strength to write it in someone else's name or not? SubhanAllah. You know what he says in the end of that statement? He says, I cry under the fear that if I was to go back, knowing what I know now about how much fame I have, I don't think I would have the strength to write it in anyone else's name. I cry over the potential of not being able to do so. That's sincerity. He is working on his soul. Seriously. Learn from that. Anyway, now what you notice here is that there was a challenge in the society that was so grave that the maraji', the grand marja of the time, directed the leading student who had the capacity to respond with that issue. He directed him in that way to be able to create something that could respond to the challenge of the time. That's important, that we have that infrastructure. And if we don't, we need that infrastructure very quickly for the challenges that we're going to be talking about. Now, the second point I wish to make before I go into the challenges is that when we come to responding to these challenges, it is utmost necessary that we take our responses from the Quran and Sunnah of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam and not allow ourselves to get drawn into the ideologies of others. Because otherwise, as I said to you earlier on in the first part of my recap, if we are the same as everyone else, if we are thinking the same as everyone else, if our output is the same as everybody else, then what is the point in your Islam in the first place? You understand? If your thought process is no different to socialism, if your thought process is no different to the Tory party, if your thought process is no different to the Liberal Democrats, then why are you a Muslim? What are you supposed to be gaining from your Islam in the tangible sense? Now, I want to be able to show you why this is so important on a practical level. Yeah? So, there's a book, and it's taken from one that we've written, and I want to present to you why I'm quoting it. This is the history of Yemen and the conversion of Yemen at the time of early Islam, and particularly the person who converted Yemen was none other than Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. Now this book goes through all of the verses of the Quran which speak about the country or the region of Yemen. So I'm quoting here from Surah Saba, and in this particular chapter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells a story about a community that was destroyed and why they were destroyed. Right. So we have Shahid al-Sadr's example, that we need to have people that are capable of responding in certain areas, and then when they respond, they can't respond to what everybody else is responding with. We need Islamic ideals to respond. Now, let's have a look. This is verses 18 and 19. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَجَعَلْنَا بَيْنَهُمْ وَبَيْنَ الْقُرَى الَّتِي بَارَكْنَا فِيهَا قُرًى ظَاهِرَةً وَقَدَّرْنَا فِيهَا السَّيْرَ سِيرُوا فِيهَا لَيَالِيَ وَأَيَّامًا آمِنِينَ. And we made between them the towns which we had blessed other towns to be easily seen, and between them we had appointed stages of journeys in due proportion between these towns. Allah says, travel therein securely by night and by day. What's this talking about? Let me explain. The verses talk about a particular group of communities, and the towns were spread apart in a way that was generally accessible, travelable by night and by day. So let's just pick an example. Here we've got Leeds, Bradford, commutable distance, for example, Rotherham, commutable distance, so on and so forth. If you picture that, that's what's being mentioned in the Quran, that there were towns that were within commutable distance. Allah says that He wants them to do what? Siru fiha layaliya wa ayyaman aminin. Travel between them freely, in security, in peace, by night and by day. Quick question to those who enjoy doing tadabbur of Quran. Why did Allah Jalla Jalaluhu tell them to travel by night and then by day? Why not by day and then by night? The answer is, because of course, as you know, when you travel by night, you feel less secure, don't you? Especially then. You're talking about wild animals, you're talking about raiders, you're talking about this. So Allah is saying, I have made the distance between your two towns commutable and safe, so much that you can even travel freely at night and you won't have to fear anything. This is what Allah is saying in the Quran. Then he continues in the subsequent verse. فَقَالُوا رَبَّنَا بَاعِدْ بَيْنَ أَسْفَارِنَا وَظَلَمُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ فَجَعَلْنَاهُمْ أَحَادِيث وَمَزَّقْنَاهُمْ كُلَّ مُمَزَّقٍ إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِكُلِّ صَبَّارٍ شَكُورٍ. Listen to this. The next verse quotes the people of that town, or some people of that town. Listen to their statement. Rabbana, they pray to their Lord, Oh Allah, make it longer distances between the two towns. Huh? Why would you want longer distances between two towns? They actually make a dua. Rabbana, ba'id bayna asfarina. Make it more distance between our travels. Allah then says, وَظَلَمُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ. They wronged themselves. فَجَعَلْنَاهُمْ أَحَادِيث. So we made them stories, we destroyed them. وَمَزَّقْنَاهُمْ كُلَّ مُمَزَّقٍ. And we dispersed them all, scattered fragments. Very interesting, isn't it? What's going on here? The story is this. Allah Jalla Jalaluhu made towns equidistant between each other, comfortable journeys, such that he said, travel even by night, you'll be fine. A group of rich and powerful and elite made a dua. Oh Allah, make the town even further in distance. You know why? Because they wanted to travel and make travel a privilege for the rich, and therefore that the poor couldn't join them in what they were doing. It's kind of like what we have right now across the world, isn't it? Alhamdulillah, mathalan, I'm a British citizen. I want to get a visa for anywhere in the world, I can do it. Can people of other countries come so freely across the world? No. So for me, I get to have the human right of freedom of movement. Human right, listen to my words. Human right. Others don't. Because there's a global south and a global north. An impoverished and a rich. What did Allah Jalla Jalaluhu say? Those rich and elite that prayed to God, Rabbana, Ba'id, make it more distance for us. Because they wanted to make that something that was purely for the rich and powerful and exclude a group of people, Allah destroyed them because of it. How many of us buy into these notions that is set up off the back of a Western world and then champion these notions for ourselves? Allah Jalla Jalaluhu gives us a Quranic precedent that when we buy into some of these notions, these can be the destruction of our societies and the downfall of our own souls. What did I say the other night? Muslims, they actually buy into the idea that there's such a thing as black and white, such a thing as race. They buy into these ideas of these borders amongst the Muslim world. Brother, the Muslim world is supposed to be an ummah. Who told you you're supposed to be divided into 50 nation states? Fighting with one another, waving your pitiful little flags, thinking that this little piece of dirt is better than this little piece of dirt. You are nothing more than living the example of the French and the Belgium and the British who carved you up nothing more than 75 years ago, and now all the Muslims are fighting with each other over their piece of dirt. Seriously? This is where Muslims have reached? Why? Because they're following not what the Quran said, Inna hadhihi ummatakum ummatan wahida. But no, I'm this country and this country. You know what's really funny? These flags that these Muslims fight and kill each other over, such nonsensical issues, even the flags, even the colors of your flags were given to you by the Westerners. Somehow Muslims have taken this as their identity, green and red. And شنو هذا? Seriously, where have you got this idea from? No wonder the Muslim community, Muslim society is in such problems. When we adopt the ideas of these people, Allah said in the Quran, we made you scattered and destroyed a most scattered scattering. But we don't read the Quran, so we don't know. So number one, we need to be able to understand that when we want to come out with a response, we need to make sure it's a response that is, like Shaheed al-Sadr showed us, it is responding to the challenges of the time, number one. And number two, it needs to be in line with Quran and Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam. We don't need to adopt any of these outside ideas. We don't need to. Look at what the Quran offers you. Review the Quran. Do a mawdu'. See what the topic says in the Quran. And then build your thinking off the back of that particular subject. Now, based on that, I want to be able to show you some of the challenges that we're going to have and then conclude in 10 minutes time, inshallah, on some of the issues that are going to come up for the Muslim community, the opportunities and the challenges for the Muslim community in a post-Brexit world, so that we can start to think about some of the ways in which we want to respond and shape Britain in the ideal of Quran and Ahlul Bayt and the example of the Holy Prophet of Islam, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alih. Number one, when we crash out without a deal and we leave these regulations that we are currently working with the EU, it means that no longer will we have those regulations, we will then have to rewrite all of those regulations. Some of them may copy what's already existing in the EU, but there's no need to copy them. It might be that the government decides we want to create our own. And therefore there is a space for the Muslim community to sit and to present its ideas. Now someone will say, yeah, no one's going to listen to the Muslim community. Well, then why are we here in the first place? You might as well just go back. If you don't think you can make a positive impact in the society with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then what are we doing here in the first place? Right? The Quran says, وَإِن مَّكَّنَّاهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ. If we're going to establish you in the land, if you want our help to be able to establish you in the earth, they will أَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةِ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةِ وَأَمَرُوا بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَنَهُوا عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. 4 conditions, 4 shurut. إِن مَّكَّنَّاهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ. We can establish you in the land. But you need to follow your Islam to be able to do so. Now, I'm going to mention some of these and just think through them very quickly so that we can conclude. Number one, where do we leave? We are going to have the issue of finance and trade deals. Everybody knows that the argument at the moment is, we'll just be able to go to WTO terms, we'll get all the trade deals that we want. This is important. Now think about this. Have you all heard of payday loaners? Payday loans, thank you. Payday loans, you've all heard of payday loans? Yeah? So those people who struggle to be able to get loans from the regular banks, sometimes they have to go to payday lenders. Yes? Hands up, just give me a figure. What is the average on your current credit card, not payday lenders? If you go and take a loan from Santander, if you go and take a loan from this, from that, what's the APR per year? 17.9%. There, yeah? Everyone happy? No one's going to be like, no, that's too high, too low. We're all happy? 17.9%? Do you know what the average is for a payday loan from one of these companies that gives you money as a last resort? Yeah, 1,355% APR. Madness. The BBC, they did their report. They said it can be anywhere between 1 and 6,000% APR. Do you know there are currently no regulations capping the amount of APR that can be charged? The Quran has an entire set of verses on helping the poor out of their poverty because of riba. Correct or not? The Holy Prophet of Islam, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, says, كُلُّ قَرْضٍ جَرَى نَفْعًا فَهُوَ riba. That every time you have a loan in which there is a benefit for someone else like this, it is riba. When it comes to this, we're going to leave the types of financial institutions that are created and amalgamated with the European Union. We're going to come out of those regulations. London, in terms of the stock exchange, London, in terms of the economic power, is one of the powers of the whole world. Yes or no? Yes. London, New York. Yes? And then we also have the Nikkei as well in Japan. Now think about this. If you are someone, remember yesterday I said to you something very important. Please pick up and join the dots. Remember I said to you, if you were a woman and all of these verses were being revealed to help you, wouldn't you flock towards Islam? If you were someone of the black community and all of these verses were being revealed to help you, wouldn't you flock towards Islam? Yes, and ila akhirihi. If you are someone in this society who is being charged up to 6,000%, and Islam has an option for you where it's able to have a robust Islamic banking system, can push it either into the mainstream government policy making, or it can actually offer in a post-Brexit world that we are able to help those people out of poverty instead of them having to be ripped off by these people. Are you telling me those people wouldn't love the way in which Islam helps them? You're telling me really people who are living in that dire poverty. I've told you this before in a couple of nights. There are 3.7 million children living in poverty in this country, in the 6th largest economy in the world. The first opportunity that we have is in the Islamic finance sector. And it requires us to realize how big an opportunity this is to remold the whole financial structure of this country and grant opportunities to people who may not yet have had opportunities. Shaheed Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh, when he wrote his phenomenal book, Iqtisaduna, he was actually invited to Egypt to be able to present it. Don't tell me that there's not space for us to be able to help the economy. Number one. Number two, we have a very polarized type of politic going on at the moment, correct? Yeah? And it's only going to get worse. But within that, as it begins to shape and reshape itself, there is huge space for Muslims to be able to go into that system. At the moment, we're only 2% represented in the parliament. There is our friend Ali Milani, who is trying to take the position. He's trying to actually take the seat of Boris Johnson in London. Wouldn't it be amazing if the current incumbent of the Prime Minister's office could be unseated by a Shia? Are you not telling me that we are making entrance points? Can you imagine the scope of how much we can go in to political positions and reshape the idea of politics altogether? Believe me, if those people who left the Tories and the Labour Party and then eventually ended up nowhere in their different, parties, if they can do things, are you telling us the strong Shia of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam cannot stand up and speak the words of Islam? We actually have muhajjaba. People might say, what's muhajjaba? Hijabi. We have a muhajjaba who is the head of the NUS. People in good, strong positions. Number two, there's a space for politics. Number three, this is very important now, this one. Food. Yesterday I mentioned our friend Jacob Rees-Mogg. Yeah? And Moggy, I don't know if you've heard this. There's a debate. If you get a chance, listen to this debate. He had a debate with James O'Brien from LBC. This is a couple of months back, and it's available on YouTube, of course. You know what he said? He was talking about post-Brexit no deal. And he said, you know what? We can easily get food James O'Brien was proving that actually we're now stockpiling food. Can you imagine? We're stockpiling food. He talked about meat consumption. And he said, look, at the moment we get the majority of our meat from the EU and it's at a certain regulatory standard. You understand? When we come out of that, those regulations won't be there, which means that you and I will be eating meat which basically has sawdust in it. Yeah? Now, in the debate between O'Brien and Moggy, he was asking him, well, how are you going to make this better for us? If we've already got the best standards in the world for meat killing and meat consumption, what are you going to do? You know, he said, we'll get our meat from New Zealand. We'll get our meat from America. So as you know, the whole idea is that we're supposed to do deals now with America, and that's where our trade is going to come from. Do you know, in the United States of America, there is no regulation for even ingredients to go on top of your food packaging? Think about that. You know, when you pick up food, you have ingredients. You can read what's in it. Do you know in certain cases in the United States of America, they don't even need to show you what's in the food. So you don't know what you're eating. Now, you have to understand, Islam provides us with guidance and guidelines on this issue. We're going to go through scarcity of food. We're going to go to 10 billion people. We can't even produce enough food at the moment. This means that even our own country is going to go short of food. Our sixth Imam, Jaffer as-Sadiq, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. The hadith mentions that there was a famine in Medina for a period of time. Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam, the hadith says, had nice, good, lavish foods, such that when the Imam had food availability, people would come. You know what the Imam did? He told his servant, give all of this food away to others and let us buy the type of food that is available to the normal folk. I'm going to read to you one quote from a book called Hayatun Tayyibah, How to Lead a Good, Pure Life, by Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Taqi al-Mudarrisi, Dama Tawfiqahu. Listen to this statement. Everyone should base their personal finances on the basis of the rights of the poor and destitute. That is, that he should take for himself a little for his personal expenses, especially when it comes to matters of luxury and entertainment, so that money can instead be spread to those who are in need. Perhaps the breadcrumbs and little amount that gathers on the table of the rich countries is sufficient to feed the poor in their entirety. And what the rich lavish in smoking, like their hookah pipes, what the rich lavish in smoking and the entrees of food and the multiple types of drinks and decorating of their houses and regularly changing their cars without such needs may be sufficient to employ every unemployed hand in their country. Indeed, it is true when Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam said, I have not seen any abundant blessing given by Allah except that next to it and by its side was a right that had been squandered from it. We have what's known as halal and tayyib. We have the highest standard of food, and we have principles like this as to how the Muslim community is supposed to live and share. Believe me, what's going to come in the post-Brexit world will be problems with the quality and the quantity of your food. It would be simple for us to be able to look back into the text like this and understand the way in which our food distribution needs to be had, the way in which our farming principles need to be had. For those of you who are Hawzawi and know, there is even Bahth Kharij on farming principles. Bahth Kharij, ijtihad on farming. We have an opportunity to be able to help in dealing with this. Last, but by no means least, we need, as a Muslim community, to be prepared for hate crime increasing and the erosion of human rights. This is very important. Currently, Britain signs up to the European human rights. When we depart from the European Union, we also depart from the European standard of human rights. Who is going to be rewriting those human rights? Yes, Boris Johnson is going to write the rights for you. The man that actually said black people have pickaninny smiles and Muslim women who wear niqab look like letterboxes. Meaning that there's going to be a space for human rights to be rewritten in Britain. Surely the Muslims should be at the forefront of writing the article on human rights. Yes or no? Yes. Yes. There is a grim future, but with that very same challenge comes opportunities to shape Britain in the image of the Quran and Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. These are the challenges. These are the things that we have in front of us. And inshallah, from tomorrow night, we need to go in to start looking at some of the specifics. We'll build the hierarchy and start with the biggest challenge that we have. And then inshallah, we will continue our series. Homework, because everybody loves their homework. Homework is going to be this. We heard from my young friend, and I've been explaining over these 3 nights multiple layers of challenges that exist within Britain for the next decade. In your opinion, now, what is the single biggest starting challenge? Having talked through all of this about there exists a maqasid al-sharia, there exists all of these multiple problems, now you pick one and see whether it's in line with what I will pick tomorrow. It's not to say that you are wrong or I am right. Let's just see how we have arrived at our conclusion of what is the single biggest challenge that Muslims want to bring about a change in Britain. And inshallah, we go into that tomorrow night. On the 2nd of Muharram, His Eminence, the Master of the Martyrs, Aba Abdullah al-Hussein, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh, arrived into the land of Karbala. This is a journey that has led them from Medina to Mecca. And as they departed Mecca as well, there would be many thousands of people that they would come across. And Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam would invite them to be part and parcel of his reform and revolution. Some of them joined. Some of them joined on the basis of thinking that this was going to be a victory that would grant them worldly goods. And so all along the Imam alayhi salam is telling them, this is a war in which we will give our lives. This is a war in which your women and children will be captured. They will be paraded. They will be sold off, or they will be attempted to be sold off as slaves. If you are joining for worldly power, leave now, for this will not be that sort of battle. When they arrived on the 2nd of Muharram, the narration mentions that the Imam himself felt this trepidation in his heart. And not just him. Even his sisters felt this sorrow in their hearts. The Imam gets off his horse and allows the horse to find its own rest. Eventually, as Zul-Jannah arrives at one point, he says, this will be the land. He asks those who are around, what is the name of this land? And different individuals give different answers. One will say it is Nainawa. Another says another name. And eventually one person says this is the land of Karb and Bala. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam says, indeed, this is the land of Karbi wal Bala. This will be the land in which we are massacred on. Sayyid Zainab alayhi salam comes to him and says, oh my dear brother, there is a pain in my heart right now that I have not felt before. Tell me, why do I feel this pain? Why am I suffering the way in which I am suffering in my mind and heart? Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam says, "Oh Zainab, oh my sister, do you remember when my father was on battle? We stopped on our way back here and he told us that this would be the land in which we were to be massacred." Eventually, the night comes of the night of Ashura. And this is a night in which the menfolk are preparing themselves for battle. This is the night in which the wives are telling their husbands, "Tomorrow, do not allow us to be embarrassed in front of Fatima Zahra." This is the night in which the mothers are telling their sons, "Do not allow us to be embarrassed in front of Fatima." When we meet her on the day of judgment and she asks, "What did you give in my way to protect my Hussein?" I don't want any of you to be coming back to us alive. There was a buzz in that camp. There was a buzz such that it's recorded that the amount of adhkar, the amount of Quran, the amount of ad'iyah that is being recited, it was like the buzzing of the beehive that night. They are walking between the camps, talking to each other, preparing each other for what is going to come the next day. It is mentioned that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam gathered his companions inside one of the tents and he begins to tell them about the events that are going to unfold tomorrow. It is said that in that night, he then begins to describe the martyrdoms, and then eventually that young boy by the name of Qasim calls out and says, "Oh uncle, is my name amongst the register of the martyrs for tomorrow?" Imam responds and says, "Oh my dear nephew Qasim, tell me, how do you see death?" To which it is narrated, he responds by saying, "Death is sweeter than honey." He says, "In that case, indeed you are registered tomorrow." He says, "Fear not, look there, do you see this young Imam Muhammadin al-Baqir?" He says that from his lineage the seventh will come, Al-Mahdi will rise and avenge what is going to happen to us tomorrow. Buoyant, celebratory of the impending entrance into Jannah, the menfolk depart. The narration says that one of the companions is standing outside of the tents of the ladies and overhears a conversation that is taking place. The ladies are asking amongst themselves, "We don't know if our menfolk are going to remain loyal to Hussein tomorrow. We fear what is going to happen to them, that many of them are going to flee." The narration says that one of the companions gathers all of the other companions outside of the tent. They call out and say, "O women folk of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, we stand out here to tell you that we reaffirm to you our pledge of allegiance that we shall never leave Aba Abdullah al-Hussein." We are told that Imam alayhi salam would sit outside his tent and he would be sharpening his sword and he would recite lines of poetry. One of the narrations says that as he's reciting a line of poetry, he says, "O time, fie be upon you, for you belie everyone who considers themselves to be a friend of you." At this moment, Imam Zain al-Abidin begins to cry. Lady Zainab begins to cry. Zainab comes running out of her tent. She says, "Oh brother, why do you say these words? How can I live knowing that you are going to be departing in the way in which you are departing?" The narration says that after that, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam falls asleep and takes a little nap. He wakes up startled in his dream. He calls his family around him and he says, "Let me tell you of the dream that I just saw. I saw myself tomorrow on the day of Ashura, and I was drowning in a pool of blood, and I was waving my arms asking, 'Hal min nasirin yansurna?' Who is going to come to my aid?" And around me were a pack of wolves, each of them biting and chomping at me. This is going to be my destiny tomorrow. The cry came out from the ladies, "Wa Husayna, wa Muhammada, wa Aliya, wa Hasana." Later on that night of Ashura,
It is said that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam takes a walk into the battlefield to survey what is happening. The narration says that one of his companions follows him in towards the battlefield quietly, step by step. The companion, when he stepped, he broke a twig. Imam turned round and said, "Who is there?" The companion says, "It is me." The companion comes towards him. Imam says, "Shall I show you where you are going to be martyred tomorrow?" He says, "Yes, show me." After he is shown being martyred, I wonder at that moment, "Oh Imam al-Hussein, did you then walk into the parts of the battlefield where the rest of